Hello, you. You're listening to A History of Italy. Episode 188, The Italian Wars 10, The Medici at Home, The End of the Sforza, and Kings and Emperors Dying.
Lascio I colli nelle valli, tra due salici piangenti, io ritrovo la speranza di un amore che ormai fu.
Before we start, a couple of technical notes. First of all, now A History of Italy podcast is also available on YouTube Music, and that is mainly thanks to listener Chris P., who pointed out that it wasn't on YouTube and should be, and also helped me through the phases of uploading the podcast. So thank you very much, Chris. And for those of you who listen to stuff on YouTube Music, you can also hear the podcast there. Then you will notice that the title of the episode is The Italian Wars 10, blah, 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 blah. I've put in this extra little Italian Wars title for those interested in the story of the Italian Wars, so you can go and pick out those specifically. For you, my constant listener who listens to every single episode, just ignore that bit and look at the fact that we are on episode 188, closing in on 200. Finally, you may be wondering why there has been a long delay in coming out with episodes, and that is simply because from the top of my great genius, I got the episode ready, edited it, exported it, even did a post about it, and then simply forgot to post it. So you're going to get 2 episodes released today. Apologies. We left the Medici back in Florence with the extra good news of Cardinal Giovanni de Medici being elected Pope with the name of Leo X. They set about gently trying to take back control in the old Medici style, not actually taking any official position of power for themselves, but stuffing the representative bodies with their own loyal men, although also making sure they avoided the most extreme sycophantic yes-men, which is also a good suggestion nowadays if you're setting up a government cabinet, but no specific reference there. The statutes of the Dominican friar Girolamo Savonarola from his time dominating Florentine politics were revoked, as were certain ruling bodies of the Republic that had been set up in his time. Machiavelli was reinstated. The relative tranquility with which the Medici restoration took place was a sign of a changing Florence and the love and even obsession for republican liberty. They had already shown a change of heart back in 1502 when they had, for the first time in their history, elected a permanent ruler when they had elected Pier Soderini Gonfaloniere for life. The families of Florence, who had traditionally been bankers and traders, the Pazzi, Soderini, Albizzi, Guadagni, Strozzi, Buondelmonti, Salviati, Rucellai, were now becoming landowners. Was it possible that Florence was ready for a signore? The Medici path was not totally smooth, with at least one rather farcical plot against them. 2 young Florentine men, Pier Paolo Bosconi and Agostino Caponi, their hearts full of heroic anti-tyrannical tales from classic literature, set up a plot to once again overthrow the Medici. The only problem was that one of the first moves of the cunning duo was to write down the names of the possible co-conspirators they could involve on a sheet of paper and then proceed to lose said piece of paper. Of course, it was found and handed in to the authorities. The people on the list had a few pretty bad days, but most managed to demonstrate that they were not actually involved in the silly plot. The 2 unfortunate young men were executed and Florence settled back down without too much of a fuss. Of course, aside from sorting things out in Florence for his family, the new Medici Pope Leo took on the international diplomacy of the complicated scenario of the early 1500s and the Italian Wars. Pope Julius II had died as peace talks were ongoing, and everybody involved wanted something different after the rapid fall of the French presence in northern Italy. Interests were varied and conflicting. The Spanish, the Swiss, the Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian, Venice, the papacy, and minor powers such as the Este of Ferrara and the Gonzaga of Mantua, the Savoy, and so on. We won't go into every detail of who wanted what and who got or didn't get what. The main pieces of news were that the Este Ferrara managed to make peace with the papacy, and a Sforza, Massimiliano, was back on the throne of the Duchy of Milan, although he was more of a puppet duke under the influence of the victors, particularly the Swiss, who in this period were at the apex of their power and prestige. The young duke wasn't too bothered about being a puppet, as he was much more interested in enjoying the life of luxury that his position offered. The French, still under King Louis XII, tried to have another go, this time allied with Venice, who really held back as long as Spain didn't intervene. To make a long story short, the high point this time around was the Battle of Novara, fought on the 6th of June, 1513, between the French, who had been left to it by their allies, and the Duchy of Milan, supported by the Swiss on the other side. As was the new system of warfare in Italy that had been inaugurated with the start of the Italian Wars in 1494, the battle was rather bloody, with up to almost 8,000 dead. After losing the Battle of Novara, French King Louis XII had had enough of trying to intervene in Italy and felt that it was a good time to pack it in and die, which he did on the 1st of January, 1515. Not having any male heirs, the throne went to his cousin, who became Francis I. If anyone in Italy hoped that Francis would turn his gaze away from the peninsula, they were about to be very disappointed. It was one of the very first things on his to-do list, actually. He reached an agreement with the Spanish to keep his border safe, made sure Venice was still on his side, and headed down across the Alps. The Swiss came in on the side of the Duke of Milan, and so did the Pope, but he did so with the ambiguity that had by now started to characterize his papacy, so he didn't actually send any troops. The Duke of Milan, Massimiliano Sforza, and his Swiss allies were expecting the French to pop up where they usually did, in Val Susa, in northwestern Italy. In part they did, although another part of the army came by sea and yet another using another mountain pass. They managed to take the commander of the Milanese army by surprise and capture him. Things were starting to look up even more for the French when they managed to take Novara, at least momentarily finding revenge for having lost the Battle of Novara, and then managed to reach an agreement with part of the Swiss supporting the Duke of Milan. However, another part of the Swiss remained and, surprising the French, attacked them on the 13th of September at Marignano, around 15 kilometers southeast of Milan. The Swiss fought with their by now renowned skill and discipline, and on the first day, as the day drew to a close, it seemed the Swiss could win and had even captured some of the French artillery. The next day, the Venetians finally got off the fence after chilling out with their army in Lodi and turned the tide of the battle. Estimates put the total combined death toll somewhere between 11 and 20,000. Gian Giacomo Trivulzio, the Italian military captain, said that he had participated in many battles, but the others had seemed like child's play. This one had been a battle of giants. The Swiss headed back home, and Massimiliano Sforza had to give up his duchy and went to live in comfortable exile in France, dying at the age of 37 in Paris, marking an end to the great Sforza dynasty that had been short-lived. If you will remember, Francesco Sforza became Duke of Milan in 1452, but leaving an important mark in the history of Milan. France was once again in control of the Duchy of Milan. The decisive Battle of Marignano would lead to the Treaty of Noyon, which was an important milestone for Venice, who, after over 7 years, put an end to the existential threat that had started with the League of Cambrai in 1509. Estimates say that the changes of control of the cities in Veneto in this period reached in some cases up to 36 times. It would take a Napoleon Bonaparte 2 centuries later to actually make good on that existential threat. The French paid off the Swiss for their holdings they had lost in Italy, although 5 out of the 13 cantons that Switzerland at the time was divided into did not agree to the treaty, a detail that would pop up again later on. Francis left, having quieted Milan by cancelling the remaining reparation payments he had exacted on the Milanese and forgiving and allowing the rebels back in. He left for France in 1516, with the Milanese already starting to strain once again under French occupation, managed by Charles of Bourbon. Involved in the peace talks was also the Pope, who had theoretically been on the losing side but not actually been involved. He wasn't too thrilled that the French had control of Milan again, but he was nothing if not pragmatic. He played with the cards he was dealt. He also had another little pet project, the Duchy of Urbino. Urbino was one of those grey areas. Not that it was physically grey, it's actually quite beautiful, but it was sort of officially under the Papal States, but then de facto ruled by a signore who at the time was a member of the Della Rovere family of the late Pope Julius II, Francesco Maria della Rovere. Pope Leo saw his chance to extend the authority of the Papal States and further the prestige of the Medici by making his nephew, Lorenzo, Duke of Urbino. The lad took a papal army to Urbino, and Francesco Maria had to leg it to Mantua. However, he didn't just roll over and give up, and by 1517 he had managed to muster an army at Verona and marched on his old duchy, where the people still supported him. There followed a rather messy little war in which Lorenzo de Medici got wounded in the head, and in the end, the Pope had to pay off the Duke, but he got the duchy for his nephew. The Pope even managed to sort out a successful marriage alliance with a member of the French royal family, Madeleine de la Tour, and from that union came a little girl who would be called Caterina. Caterina de' Medici is one of those names you might want to remember. After all the effort his uncle had put into sorting him out, Lorenzo very inconveniently died in 1519, shortly after his bride. The Duchy of Urbino passed under the direct control of the papacy, although there would be a Della Rovere Duke there until the early 1600s. 1516 also saw an opportunity for Florence to extend their influence to more of Tuscany. That is the year in which His Most Catholic Majesty Ferdinand of Aragon, King of Spain, died at the age of 63. We'll see how his succession led to rather monumental consequences, but specifically, and for now, it meant that the little Republic of Siena, towards the southern part of the region, had lost its protector. It did not take Pope Leo long at all to depose the de facto Signore of Siena, Borghese Petrucci, and replace him with a relative, Raffaele Petrucci, who was more well-inclined to Florence. Now Florence was just missing poor little Lucca, and with King Francis promising that he would not renew French protection of the Republic, you can bet their days were numbered. We said before that King Ferdinand died in 1516. The throne of Spain, and so also the lands of Sardinia, Sicily, and the Kingdom of Naples, went to his young grandson, little Charlie of the rising Habsburg dynasty. This little 16-year-old chappie would grow to be the lord of one of the first empires on which the sun never set, if you factored in his efforts to expand Spanish colonies in the New World. With so much of Europe, and indeed the world, for him to play around in, and big boys to contend with such as France and England, surely Charles was not going to be interested in little Italy. Perhaps now the Italian powers could get on with their own business without those meddling emperors and kings gallivanting around. Perhaps Pope Leo could get on with the strengthening of the Medici dynasty without too much external meddling. His authority as the head of the Universal Church seemed stable after talk of any councils had died down after his agreement with the French. Surely there wasn't a rather annoyed German priest somewhere who was about to very publicly hang up a sheet of paper with a series of complaints. Surely not. After all, what could possibly go wrong? Grazie, thank you very much for listening. A History of Italy podcast is a Sentire Media podcast, created and hosted by me, Mike Corradi, and produced by our wonderful Patreon supporters, whom I'd like to thank, starting from the second half of the Margherita Hack and Galileo Galilei level, and they are Jeffrey W., John W., John J., Jordan C., Joshua G., Julia G., Justin E., Kyle D., Old John in Milwaukee, Linus, Mark P., Michus Porcius, Moppet King, Nonna, Paradise, Patrizia K., Rocco B., Rod L., Russell F., Sandra P., Scott L., Sean M., Shelby Stephen, Simon O, Stephen M, Tap Dance Down Under, and Thomas C. And of course, we can never forget the tippy top Maria Montessori and Dante Alighieri level, Lisa K, Peter W, David L, David C, Sen, David A, Karen D, Helenka, Brigid, Dallas, Joseph V, Stephen G, and Julian. We also have to give a very warm welcome to new Patreon supporters Ed S, Aurora T, and Thomas C. Thank you. Welcome aboard. Welcome to the family. Welcome to the friendship. Welcome to everything that is good about our modest little podcast. If you'd like to get in touch, we'd be more than happy to have a chat. My star actress, for example, would like to hear more comments about the sketches. hello@ahistoryofitaly.com or social media, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Once again, thank you very much for listening, and until next time, arrivederci. Agostino, here you are. Did you make sure you weren't followed?
Yes?
Yes, you made sure, or yes, you were followed?
Well, I passed by the Medici palace, and the guy started following, but I made sure he wasn't a Medici spy.
How?
Well, I asked him, "Are you a Medici spy?"
And what did he say?
He said he wasn't.
Whew, that was a close one. But wait, isn't that exactly what a Medici spy would say?
Aha! I thought the same thing.
Clever. So what did you do?
Well, I said, "Are you sure?"
What did he say?
He said yes.
Oh, okay, good. You know how delicate this matter is. Our lives are on the line.
Yes, but I would give up my life gladly to rid Florence of those tyrannical pigs, the Medici.
Yeah, what have those swine ever done for us?
Well,
what?
there's the artwork and the cathedral and San Lorenzo and a few decades of stability and the wealth and international prestige.
Okay, Paul, let's not go there.
Good idea.
What did the guy look like?
What guy?
The guy who is definitely not a Medici spy.
Well, you can see him for yourself. He's the guy over there looking in our window wearing the Medici colours and emblem.
Okay, and you're sure then that he's not a Medici spy?
Well, I had the same doubt, you see.
And?
Well, he said, if I were a Medici spy, would I be wearing the Medici colours and emblem?
Ah, yes, good point. So what is he doing there?
Well, he said he was a conspiracy consultant, and if by any chance we were organising a conspiracy, he could give us a consultation.
Did you tell him we were organising a plot?
Of course not. He said, just in case we were organising one.
Oh, okay. So, let's get down to the business of setting up the possible co-conspirators.
Okay, that's right, the Medici. They're powerful and could be a great help.
Ah, yeah, but, you see, the conspiracy is against the Medici.
Oh, yeah. That would be weird if they were conspiring against themselves.
So, who should we try to approach?
How about Sergio the Secret Spiller?
Sergio the Secret Spiller. So how did he get that nickname?
Not sure.
Okay. We'll also put Niccolò Machiavelli.
Oh, yes, he's very crafty. I'll bet he's really good at conspiracies.
Yes. What about Tommaso the Tattletale?
Yeah, and his mistress, Carolina the Chatty Chambermaid.
They're lovers? Who told you?
Sergio the Secret Spiller. No, wait. Maybe it was Bartolomeo Blabbermouth. Put him down too.
Who else?
Lorenzo de Loquacious, Rinaldo de Watt, Sylvia the Songbird.
Okay, so I think that's it. What a great conspiracy. But we must make sure that it's absolutely secret. So, shall we now put this dangerous list locked up somewhere safe, or shall we put it nonchalantly in a pocket, precariously balanced, so that it could fall out at any moment without us noticing?
The second thing.
Ah, yes, good idea.
I know, yes, thank you.